Hello and welcome to the University of Western Ontario Debate Society Introduction to Debate series. We're now moving into our sixth and final module in this series. As of now, we've covered all the fundamentals you need to know to engage in formal debating of any type, whether it be how to approach a debate topic, how to understand debating from a very top level, a kind of eagle eye, how to structure your speech and how to have a styled speech. And then lastly, the three different tools that you'll be using in any type of debate, which is constructive argumentation, refutation, and rebuilding. Now we're going to see how these different debate formats come into play, what kinds of expectations they create, and specifically analyze British parliamentary as your first debate style that you are going to learn. So, debate formats. Regulated debates come in different forms, known as formats, and each comes with its own set of rules and conventions. Some examples of what these rules can affect include how long you speak and what you're expected to do inside of your speech, / what is legitimate and not. At the University of Ontario Debate Society, we participate in two types of debate formats, the British parliamentary style and the Canadian parliamentary style. British parliamentary. British parliamentary style debate is one of the most popular forms, and it's based on debates in the British Parliament. It was first adopted by the United Kingdom universities, but is now popular in debating competitions and around the world. This is actually known as the world standard of debate. In fact, the world championship is held in British parliamentary style. In British parliamentary, there are two sides or benches in a debate, the government or proposition versus the opposition, who must support and oppose a given motion respectively. The teams are divided into opening and closing halves of the debate. Each bench or side consists of two separate teams, and each of these teams consists of two speakers. This means that each debate has a total of 4 teams and 8 speakers. So unlike conventional knowledge or what you'd expect, instead of just having one team on government and one team on opposition, in British parliamentary, you have 2 teams on each side, and they're all against each other. And we'll kind of explain how this dynamic comes into play, what type of different expectations does that create, and how could you find success in this type of competition. So the key features of British parliamentary is that each team is given 15 minutes of preparation prior to their starting round. So this is limited time, so using it effectively is important. So unlike other types of maybe prepared formal debates, British parliamentary is known to be an impromptu-ish debating style, which means that you are given very limited amount of time to get ready for debating, as opposed to other types of debate formats that maybe give you a lot of time or give you topics in advance. Instead, in this situation, you are given a topic, let's just say at a competition or in practice. You have 15 minutes to prepare, and then the debate begins. All university level debaters are allotted 7-minute long speeches, except for the one beginner tournament which is called the McGill Central Novice, or this year it's McGill, but it's called the Central Novices Tournament, which will feature 5 long speeches, and it will be for first year or first time debaters. It is advisable to use all the time afforded by the speaking time, and there's also 15 seconds of grace period at the end of every speech. So technically the maximum allotted time per speaker is 7 minutes and 15 seconds. So time-wise, the key things you need to remember is 1, there's 15 minutes of preparation time. So knowing how to use preparation time is important, and we'll cover in a future module. And then secondly, there's 7 minutes and 15 seconds worth of time for your speech. And if you're doing that first tournament, it will be 5 minutes and 15 seconds. So how does this work? What's the ordering? What is British parliamentary in terms of structure? How does this formal debate play out? So in a British parliamentary debate, the opening government speaker takes the floor first. Afterwards, teams alternate between benches. That is, after the first speaker of opening government has finished, the first speaker of opening opposition takes the floor, then the second speaker of opening government, then the second speaker of opening opposition, etc. As you can see, kind of creates like this little zigzag where it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and ends with the opposition whip. Depending on where they are in the debate, speakers have slightly different roles. So as you can see, the person that goes first, the prime minister, is not necessarily going to have the same obligations or availability of opportunities as the person that goes eighth. And we'll explain why that comes into play. So speakers are expected to fulfill the tasks specific to their role. So similar to soccer, which has different positions that each player is expected to fulfill, you have to do that in debating. So again, the defense is not tasked with scoring goals. It's going to be kind of similar here, where you're going to have different types of speaker roles that you have to do, and you have to learn how to approach it and not cross the boundaries, because especially some of these boundaries are explicitly set in order to make the debate fair. For instance, I'll just give one kind of as a precursor to what we're getting into, but the opposition whip cannot bring in any new arguments because, as you might imagine, it'd be pretty unfair if the eighth speaker of the debate is able to bring in new arguments that no one on this government bench could respond to because they went previous to him or them. So what are the roles of each of these speakers and like in more specifics? So opening government, we have the prime minister. The prime minister is responsible for laying out the model, which is the definition and government's kind of policy. So as we've covered in the second module, in terms of motions, we have discussed exactly what a model is and what are the obligations of it. And if you forgot, I'd recommend going back and checking that specific point where we talk about models. So again, you're going to be clarifying key aspects of a debate, setting the boundaries of the debate, etc. You're also responsible for forwarding the main case of their team. So typically 1 to 3 constructive arguments. Again, we covered constructive arguments in our fifth module where we discuss constructive argumentation, how to approach it, how to structure it. So you're just going to be building your team's case, which makes sense because no one else has said anything. And so you are the first one to speak. You set up the debate, you provide arguments, you can't really respond to anyone else. Secondly, we have the leader of opposition, or the LO, in their part of opening opposition. So if necessary, you are to introduce a counter policy or challenge any of the prime minister's setup. So if you think that they did something unfair in terms of defining the motion, like that removes any reasonable arguments you thought you would have, you could challenge them. Or you could also introduce potentially a counter model or counter policy. Again, this was also something covered in the second module in terms of motions. Otherwise, you can introduce OO stance in contrast to opening government. So how do you differ in terms of goals and stuff like that? Next, you forward the main case of your team. Again, typically 1 to 3 constructive arguments. And then lastly, you also want to rebut or refute the prime minister's speech. You're going to start giving responses to the prime minister and their case. Next, we have the deputy roles. So we have the deputy prime minister, and this is supposed to be deputy leader of opposition. I forgot to change that. So the deputy prime minister, again, is going to respond to the leader of opposition. So as you might notice, now that we've gone past the first speaker, there's going to be a lot of responding. So you're going to be rebutting / refuting. Next, you're going to rebuild your partner's case because now that your partner spoke and the leader of opposition refuted your partner's case, presumably, you have to defend it and rebuild it to the responses that the leader of opposition gave and to ensure that it stays relevant throughout the round. You could then extend on any analysis or forward a new argument. The forwarding the new argument is completely optional. If you feel like the leader of opposition did not respond thoroughly to your partner's case and therefore you have a lot of extra time, or you think you missed something that you think is incredibly important, feel free to mention it and bring it up as an argument. Lastly, you are to summarize your position, your opening government as a team position, and explain why you are winning the debate or are going to win the debate. Deputy leader of opposition does very similar things. They rebut the prime minister and the deputy prime minister. They rebuild their case brought by leader of opposition that's presumably refuted by the deputy prime minister. They extend on any analysis or for any argument, which is also optional. And lastly, they summarize their partner's case and their case and explain why they are winning the debate. This is what the roles are for front half. For back half roles, we have closing government and closing opposition. For closing government, the member of government, or the MG, is to bring in new substantive extension material. What this means is that when you are in closing, in order to do well, and this is where I'm going to kind of start explaining where these kind of ideas play into, you are to bring in a new argument or a new line of analysis that has not been thoroughly explored, analyzed, or brought up in the front half. Because you are not going to be preparing with the opening government as closing government. In fact, you're competing against them. You're ranked from 1 to 4 in terms of performance. So by virtue of that happening, you need to make sure that you bring in new analysis that is not necessarily contradictory to what your opening government said, but is better or more important than what we've heard out of opening government. So this could be different arguments, new lines of analysis based on what they have said. So if you think that they insufficiently analyze a point, feel free to analyze it better. This might include rebuttal that are notably different from your opening half. And then next, you're also going to rebut the leader of opposition, deputy leader of opposition. So you're going to rebut opening opposition. The key thing is, and this is going to be the same for the member of opposition, is that you're going to want to make sure that you explicitly explain why your case is different and better than the front half. This is very important to ensure that you are not labeled as a team that is copying the front half, because that is a very fast avenue for losing on closing. It creates this interesting trade-off because as closing, you have more time to prepare and you're able to kind of nitpick the case based on what you hear from the front half. But front half has first mover's advantage. So if they're really well able to approach the debate and able to use a lot of the material, then it'll make it harder for you to do well. So again, situationally, it could be good, it could be bad, but as a debater, you have to be trained to do well in all conditions. I typed this as well wrong. It's not leader of opposition. This is member of opposition, but basically the exact same role as member of government, except the only difference is that you also have time or the opportunity to refute the member of government, which you should focus more on doing because of the fact that if you do not respond to member of government, then the government whip won't have anything to respond to your responses to them and rebuild. So don't focus as much on the opening half, since opening opposition already did that a lot. Focus on member of government. If they didn't have a good case or something like that, you could do it a little bit and then go opening government. You should respond to all of them, but I'm just making explicitly clear it's not a good idea to just ignore the member of government. Now the whip speeches, government and opposition whip, which again both do the same things. They summarize the debate into main clashes and ideas. These could be like questions. These could be different topic areas. For instance, maybe you think the debate was split up into economics, diplomatic stuff, and military stuff, or maybe political stuff and economic stuff, or maybe in specific questions. You could split it up however you want. You could go team by team. It doesn't really matter. All you're meant to do as a whip is prove how your team comes out on top. So you're trying to provide a narration, a summary of the round that is biased. So you are summarizing the round, you're summarizing what people said, but you are trying to make sure that it puts your team on top, that you're explaining it in a way that's clearly indicating why your partner's case was the most important. So you need to do that through rebutting and rebuilding. You are to focus on your partner's contribution, as I mentioned, and you are not allowed to bring in new material as a government whip. Or opposition whip. I want to make this very clear. You are not to bring in new arguments. You could bring in new refutation. Maybe you could sneak in a quick, like, little bit of extra analysis to a point that is like not game changing, but you think it might help a little bit and portray it as a retelling of that analysis. Again, not advised, but you can get away with. But you are not to start saying, here's a couple of new arguments for you, honorable speaker. So these are all the different roles that you have and what they're supposed to do, both based on kind of halves. So what back half should try to do against front half and what front half should do against back half, and based on each speaker role specifically. So what is role fulfillment then? Role fulfillment is a term used to assess whether a speaker completed their expected responsibilities specific to their role. So as I mentioned, the Prime Minister has an obligation to define the debate clearly. Not doing so could harm the debate, and therefore, if you do not do that and ends up harming the debate, this could harm your potential chance of winning. For both member speakers, they must present a new extension. Again, you ought not just repeat a new argument, you ought to provide an extension, a new line of reasoning based on what you've heard, or a new argument that has not been heard before. Whip speakers should summarize the contributions of both teams. These are, again, part of their role, and they ought not bring any new material. So no new constructive arguments, but you can have new rebuttal, new defenses, or explanations of existing arguments. Role fulfillment is an expectation. That is, not fulfilling your speaker role will harm your chances of winning, but fulfilling your speaker role won't necessarily translate into winning. These are just basic gameplay, right? It's like if you're playing soccer and you're playing defense, you playing defense does not mean you're automatically going to win just because you're playing defense. And that is a role that you're supposed to have on a soccer team. But not playing defense can definitely, not having that role at all, could definitely harm your chances of winning. So that's kind of an analogy I would bring forward to you understand how role fulfillment comes into play and why you should make sure that you understand the different roles and what you're supposed to do. Points of informations. A lot of people find this specifically to be a fun part of debate. Points of information, aka POIs, are opportunities for debaters to rise during an opponent's speech to ask questions or offer comment. Teams cannot ask points of information to team on their own bench. So as a closing government, you cannot ask opening government for a POI, like a question that is trying to indicate some kind of flaw in the argument. To indicate you would like to ask a POI, you merely stand up, and some speakers will raise their hand forward as well to make it even clearer. For online debating, typically POIs are offered either verbally or by chat depending on the speaker's preference, which they'll indicate at the top of their speech. The speaker has the option of either accepting the POI by acknowledging the questioner, at which point the questioner will have 10 to 15 seconds to ask their point of information. And if the speaker does not want to take the point of information, it is customary to wave the offer down physically or verbally by saying things like, not at this time, or just like shooting it down with your hand. Again, you don't have to take a POI just because it is offered, but you are expected to take 1 to 2 POIs during your 7-minute speech. If it's a 5-minute speech, it's just one. Taking any more is discouraged because it means you're giving too many opportunities for the other teams to speak and ask you questions as opposed to you building up your case. But taking none is also discouraged and is frowned upon and could affect your ability to win because it seems like to the judges that you're not willing to engage with questions from the other side. And sorry, the last thing is that these questions and points of information are designed typically to point out some kind of flaw in the other team's speech. So you're maybe like hearing an argument, you're like, oh, I don't think that this is necessarily right. So then you'd say, oh, would you agree that this is not necessarily the way that things are? And after that, they would have the opportunity to respond. So how do you win in British parliamentary? Each team tries to push forward their cases, and the most persuasive team will win. So this is kind of an extension of what we talked about in the fourth module when we talked about judges and what they're looking for. You are going to win as a team, and it's whoever's most persuasive as a team, they'll win. All teams are ranked from first to fourth in performance. So there is a range between winning and losing. If you get first and second, you're technically winning. And if you get third or fourth, you're losing. And there's a relative amount because first is like hard win, second is like a soft win, right? Even though there are only two sides of the debate, closing and opposing teams take different approaches to the motion and are still competing against each other. And again, I keep on hammering this home, but it's really important. This example illustrates it perfectly for you. For example, in the motion, this House regrets Taylor Swift as a feminist icon. The opening government may talk about how they regret Taylor Swift appropriating feminism to sell her music and how this commercialization is damaging to the feminist movement. The closing government may talk about how they regret Taylor Swift as a feminist icon because she and her immediate social circle are all white, conventionally attractive women who do not speak about intersectional interests. So as you could see, these are two different arguments. Both are different reasons why you might not like Taylor Swift as a feminist icon. However, closing teams must ensure that their arguments are consistent with their opening counterpart and ought not explicitly rebut their opening counterpart. So remember, you are not rebutting as closing government your opening government or closing opposition your opening opposition because you're technically still on the same team, quote, quote, you're on the same side. So this is known as knifing if you just start explicitly refuting your opening government, opening opposition, and that could lead to you to potentially losing if it's really bad. The team that is the most persuasive will be the team that sustained the least amount of damage to their case by the end of the debate, meaningfully engaged with their adversaries through POIs and rebuttal, and proved why their case is the most important and it is most truthful. All right, so all in all, this was a brief introduction to British parliamentary debate and formats. Moving forward, there's going to be more specifics about each type of role, like seminars on whips, on extensions, on how to be doing all these specific things about all these roles. But as of now, by the end of all these modules, you should have a good understanding of how to approach formal debating in general, irregardless of format, how to approach making arguments, how to approach motions, how to approach debate in terms of a top-down view. And now you should also understand British parliamentary so you're able to at least engage in it. Thank you for listening to the Introduction to Debate series.